Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. In today's episode, it's going to be a bit of a fan favourite, one where we sit down and answer your frequently asked questions. This, once again, is a solo podcast, and today I'm going to be spending some time touching on general gear sort of tidbits, some hunting tips and strategies, as well as a few specific questions sent in by you, our valued listeners. If you have a question that you want answered or feel would be a good one for the podcast, then please send them through to our email, info@twinelements.com.au. Please use the subject line FAQ so we can process all of those. We also tend to answer a lot of questions on social media. Simply send us a DM on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and we will strive to get that question answered and then sent, back to you guys. We also have the Twin Elements account, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors and James Doumtsis Outdoors, so there's plenty of ways you can message us on there. Without further ado, we'll get stuck into the questions. Being so passionate about food and cooking, we have teamed up with Camp Chef. With portable cookware for wherever your travels take you, Camp Chef provides a better way to cook food. Whether in the backyard or the backcountry, shop pellet grills, their cast iron range, or portable cooking systems today. We personally love their large 12-inch diameter skillets and camp ovens for cooking over the coals. Alrighty, so this first question is one that we get nearly daily sent into our Instagram DMs. We're constantly getting asked about what phone and GPS mapping services we are using on our hunts. So I'll just start off by listing GPS Kit. That's probably the most common answer we send back to people. It's a mobile phone application. It's downloadable offline maps that come in the form of satellite images, essentially. So it's awesome for scouting. I've used it a lot in the Northern Territory for downloading maps of huge parcels of land, 1 million acres, and then having the capability to access that when I'm, out off service, away from any human civilization, and getting those satellite images, as I said. It's really good for flat areas. More so what I used it for with really good success was for locating water sources, tracks, game trails, those sorts of things that were leading me to where water buffalo and feral pigs were. It would have similar use in the mountains, but to be honest, in a lot of places that I have hunted in the mountains, especially on the New South Wales or southeast Queensland sort of coast areas, you do get intermittent bits of service. So there are aspects to use online maps, which are just going to be a lot more accurate. You can really look at each fold of the mountain as well. So GPS Kit, the benefit of it is that it's a one-time download for $15 on the App Store. So I'm assuming it's going to be compatible with Android users as well as iPhone. I know it definitely works for iPhone users, which is great. I, to be honest, should check that out, but it's just something that you're going to have to check and give a bit of feedback on if you are an Android user. One of the features I love most about it is that you can add in drop pins to any of the maps, and then it has the capability to add images that you've taken on your phone in the field and sort of collate that data as a bit of a, if anyone's seen those forensic scientists with the massive wall full of basically clues and things like that, and they're sort of doing all the links with bits of string towards different images. It basically looks like that, this massive scatter of images on a mapping service, and you can then go and see sort of the hotspots by looking at the pins and going, oh, yep, that's the wallow, that's that, and checking sort of, how fresh it is, and all these things by real-time live images that you've added to the drop pin. Another one that we have recently been using is the Garmin Explore app. So this, again, is live for use on your smartphone. You can also use it on tablets and things like that. And what's really great about this is that it allows for pairing between eligible smartphones and then the handheld Garmin GPS units, which James and I obviously run. So it also allows for cloud storage for you to save a bank of information and pins and all that type of stuff. It also has downloadable offline maps. We've personally used this a lot less, but it is another option to consider. It's something that we used on our red deer hunts just because other members in camp were using it. And now that we're using a lot more Garmin GPS handheld kits, I think it's going to be something that we use for sort of, I guess, prior online scouting, and then being able to take that into the hills and having pins on both the handheld unit and our phone. And then you can also use it for, I guess, like emergency services with messaging and all that type of stuff as well. So that's another really good option there. It would be naive of me not to mention Onyx maps for anyone heading to the USA. The unfortunate thing about the Onyx map service is that you have to have a, I guess, address in the US that you can use to then download the app and sort of use it on your desktop. We have the app on our phones because James and I have obviously been over to the US. It is the best mapping service that we've ever used when it comes to use in the USA. There are specialized drop pins with different icons. For example, if you see an elk, you can go and use a little icon that has an elk on it. Same for deer. Whether you want to add an arrow, turkeys, the car, camp, whatever, which is pretty cool to be able to look at a map and go, oh yeah, there's the car, like not have to look at different sort of drop pins. Just something that makes, ease of, I guess, storing information a lot easier and more accurate. But then it also has so many different functions that we'll probably end up doing its own little podcast on, just because it is such a great tool for use and the mapping with Onyx maps. But in terms of topography, trails, all that type of stuff, it's just second to none. But here in Australia, the actual acquiring and setting up an Onyx account can be a little bit difficult. So that's probably all I'll say on that for now. I've also been running the Garmin 67i handheld GPS unit with a screen. So the reason I chose that over a Garmin InReach, which is what James uses, is that it also allows for better, I guess, mapping services. You can check the weather. It also has messaging functions, same as the InReach, but you can sort of see it and use it a lot easier because it does have that larger screen. So they're about $1,000 AUD here in Australia. So they are quite expensive, but it's an awesome bit of kit. As I said, if your phone's ever running flat or whatever, you're on multiple pack hunts, like day pack hunts, it's really good to be able to have multiple avenues to look at pins, know where you're going in the mountains, as well as that emergency SOS function, which is absolutely vital. So essentially the 67i from Garmin is same as an InReach Mini, just has a lot more functions in terms of mapping services, weather, like all that. So that's why I'm running it this year in the bush. So the next question that we have got sent in again has been by a range of people, and it's another topic that we seem to get a ton of interest in, especially over the rut. With a few critters hitting the deck early in 2025 for us, it felt right to sort of touch on this subject now. And that is, what arrow and broadhead setups are you lads running for your hunts in 2025? So I'll sort of break it down here into arrow and broadheads each separately for James and I. We will be doing, I guess, an arrow and a broadhead specific podcast in the future. Hopefully we'll get, the experts on who have created the broadheads, who have created the arrows on, and they can tell us a bit more information just so we can give you guys the best rundown as to why, what, etc. We can definitely speak to it because we've shot broadheads and arrows for a long, long time. We sort of know what works, what we look for in these sort of things and the specifications. But yeah, I think each of those brands that we use will be able to give you better respective information that we obviously think is important to be translating to you guys as our listeners as to why, and some of the benefits that we may not even know about in the gear, and things that we see with awesome blood trails and awesome, I guess, results in quick, clean, humane deaths. They might be able to speak to the science behind what they've put into these brands. So we'll start off, I guess, with arrows. We've recently joined the team over at Day 6 Gear, who make the Day 6 shafts. It's interesting. For a bit of background, way back in 2016, I believe it was, I used to actually shoot an Australian company, arrow company called Zalor. So for those of you who have been around the bow hunting scene for a little while, you may remember Zalor shafts or Zalor arrows. I actually personally had huge success with both the 300 and 250 spine shafts, taking a range of species from Sambar deer, fallow deer, Chital, pigs, goats, whatever it was. I guess you name it. I probably hunted it way back in 2016 and really, really liked those arrows. Fast forward a couple of years, and Zalor was unfortunately or fortunately sold to a US company, which for me, as only a young fella, sort of made getting the arrows a bit more difficult to acquire. And to be honest, that sort of turned me off. It wasn't ever because of their performance or anything like that, which I guess was good. That relationship sort of ended more so because of distribution and just access and things like that. So anyway, come full circle, and here in 2025, we recently actually met the owner of Day 6 Gear, Brian Broderick, and he's a wonderful human and really intelligent, has a lot of backing behind this brand, and yeah, he's basically the owner of Day 6 Gear. So we're pleased to announce that, interesting, the new and improved Zalor shafts that we were shooting in 2016 were purchased by a US company, which is now Day 6 Gear. So you may have seen that they also have broadheads, knives, archery shafts, like all this different stuff. So they're a really great gear brand in the archery industry. But we're also pleased to announce that they're now distributed here in Australia by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. And you all know that we've got the relationship there with Venture, and they've been very receptive to basically getting in the gear here in Australia that we trust and use. So that's a huge benefit to you guys, the listeners, and just the hunting community in Australia. The more gear that we can get here in Australia that we can get our hands on and have access to just gives us more increased opportunity to obviously try different things, see what works for different people and in different sort of environments on different animals. So both James and I are shooting their 275 HD shafts. These are a bit of a hybrid between their 250 and 300 spine shafts, which has been pretty interesting to shoot. The 270 spine shafts come in at roughly 11.8 grains per inch, I think, from memory. Probably should have checked that, but they've basically been really bomb-proof and super consistent for us. As many of you would have seen early in the 2025 period, they've proven themselves as a really perfect all-rounder for most Australian game and pest animals, in my opinion. I'm really keen to try them on buffalo and bangtang bulls later in the year, just being a really, really big game animal. But so far, like straight out of the box, they've shot extremely true and have been really deadly. Personally, like I've taken chital deer, a couple of red stags, some feral pigs and goats with them already, and there's no reason why I don't think they shouldn't perform on buffalo and bangtang bulls. So very keen to continue the testing with those. As I said, they are available now through Venture Hunting and Outdoors on their website or in store. I guess we'll talk about the pointy end of the arrow setup next. And yeah, James and I have been using Cayuga broadheads for the last probably 2 years now. I am personally shooting the 150 grain Zots. They are a 2-blade broadhead. Again, tried and tested, constructed by none other than the great Ian Summers here in Australia, who sort of designed the broadhead, sorry. And there's not really anything more that I can say about them, really. They're extremely clean, very easy to use. It goes by that sort of saying of keep it simple, stupid. They're very easy to sharpen, and then they're thus extremely deadly. I've had very few issues with them in terms of penetration on big game is absolutely supreme, getting pass-throughs on bangtang bulls and things like that, so, and buffalo as well. So I think coming back to just being extremely easy to sharpen means that they're very usable and practical for all different hunting experience levels. And I think going back to, most people know that James and I love our 2-blade broadheads. The Zots for me have just been really good. If you do want the benefits of, extra blades, that's where I think going into James's setup can be really advantageous. So James is using the 150 grain Gen 2 pilot cuts with bleeders, once again from Cayuga broadheads. One thing I will say about these is that they're a little bit more difficult to sharpen, but once you sort of get the hang of it, they're extremely deadly, just because, again, of that design and the actual blade material. But these give epic blood trails. So what James is using them as at the moment is a pretty standard 2-blade broadhead, but then he has the option to add in bleeders with that. And that's where the bleeders add in so much more extra cutting diameter to what is essentially a 2-blade broadhead in terms of penetration and just restrictions in terms of what pushing a 2-blade through skin and hide and meat and muscle and whatever compared to a 3-blade, it has a lot less surface area. And by adding those little bleeder blades at the back of the broadhead, the tip of the broadhead and the 2 blades have already sort of essentially done the work and punched that through the hide. And then the bleeder blades just allowed that to then go and really open up. And again, James has retrieved animals on, shots that have probably been a bit marginal. And we've really put it down to having that broadhead up front of his arrow that has contributed to him finding animals in really short distances when it might have otherwise been a bit more of a difficult tracking job and potentially even lost that animal, which is something that regardless of experience levels, we all, I guess, are faced with as bow hunters and hunters in general, is that, in life or death scenarios, unfortunately, it isn't always extremely quick and sometimes things can go badly, but that's where having gear that allows you and helps cater for those, very few instances where things don't quite go to plan and still allow you to get the outcome that you've desired and achieve, is really, really important. And again, with those Cayuga pilot cuts, you're essentially getting a 4-blade benefits with the wound channels and bleeding and stuff with 2-blade accuracy and penetration, which is really, really cool. And again, hats off to the guys at Cayuga for creating such awesome gear. We're loving their broadheads. And for you guys that are listening, for 10% off your next Cayuga broadheads order, be sure to use code TWIN10 at checkout and they will look after you there.
Know where you stand with onX, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilize onX whilst hunting in the US. Its mapping systems, specialist drop pins, tracking features, topographical maps, and accuracy is unmatched. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts overseas in the comfort of our own home is a game changer. If you're looking at hunting in the US, Canada, or Alaska, then onX is a must.
The last of our, general sort of questions for the start of the podcast is another one that we've sort of received a bit. We've had someone message in and say, I see you've swapped from your Vortex and Maven binoculars. What optics are you guys currently running? So again, yes, we have recently switched. We are now both, James and I, using Leopold optics, which is really exciting for us, getting some really, really great bits of gear and equipment to try. So I have been running the Range HD binoculars, which are, I think it's the BX4 from memory, 10 by 42 times optics. Again, these binoculars have been really, really good. I haven't actually had them in my hands for too long, but I have taken them on a few spotted safaris hunts, and where I really enjoy them is particularly for the rifle deer hunts, where I can be glassing deer at, say, 100 meters away and getting super accurate laser range finding capabilities while also watching my clients take the shot. So they'll find a rest, I'll get them on a nice tree, be like, yep, the deer's walking to the left broadside, they identify it, and they'll be like, how far away is he? I can just simply hit a button while glassing him, never taking my eyes away or having to fiddle around for a small handheld rangefinder. And whilst, as I said, using the binoculars on him, watching for the shot and stuff, can read off a super accurate, he's at 102 yards or 106 meters, whatever settings you want. And again, these binoculars are super clear. They're a little bit heavier because they do have the range finding capabilities built in there. But you can range deer-sized objects over 1 kilometre away, which is, again, for bow hunting, it's overkill, but for rifle hunters, it's great to be able to go, oh, okay, that deer's at 1 kilometre away. And then you range, a ridge or a bench or somewhere that you want to shoot from on the path to getting to that deer, and you can range a ridge at, say, 250 metres away from the animal, so 750 metres away from you. You can go, oh, if we get to that ridge, he should only be 250 metres away on that opposing face. And that's super, super valuable because it's all in one, as I said. And it's as simple as pushing a little button, and that gives you really accurate ranges. They also have archery-specific options, which I'm sort of yet to explore, to be honest, but pretty keen to come back to you guys with a bit of feedback on that. So James was fortunate enough to get, again, Leopold optics. He's running the BX5, what's called the Santiums, in a 10 by 50. These are honestly the best binoculars that we've ever used. They're extremely lightweight. In terms of low light, they're just absolutely excellent, really. And I think it's because you can hold them so steady. And I think with that 10 by 50, I don't know, the increased, view really helps with drawing in light, I think. But they are high definition and there's great image clarity. Like we were glassing foxes. It was pretty cool because I had the 10 by 42s with the ranging capabilities. And we were glassing foxes from like over a kilometre away on opposing ridges. And James could see like which way their head was facing when they bedded down and which way their tail was and these types of things. Again, they're waterproof and Leopold are good enough to do a lifetime guarantee, which is pretty cool on these quality products. So again, it's early days for us, but the Santiums are very lightweight, don't have the range finding capability, but the glass clarity and image quality has been absolutely amazing so far. We've recently got the SX4 Pro spotting scopes and their Alpine tripods as well, which has been pretty cool. I've used them a little bit up north on Chital deer, and what makes the tripod really good is that it's highly adjustable. So the tripod itself is extremely lightweight and goes from 5 inches in height to about 58 inches in height, which is pretty good because it means you can glass from like, a sitting or prone position all the way up to standing up, which is great. It also has quick attachment options with the base plate. And then as far as the spotting scope goes, again, they are a little bit heavy in the sense of it's not something that we'll use on every hunt, especially when James has the 10 by 50s and I've got the 10 by 42s and we can see kilometres with those already. But for certain hunts, especially like if we were going over to New Zealand, James has been using them on his sort of winter post-rut hunting red deer and just looking at red deer over, 6 kilometres away, being able to identify what's a mature stag, what's a lesser stag, these sort of things from 6 kilometres away is absolutely essential in basically just not wasting time trying to get over to a different, postcode essentially and wasting time getting all the way over there just for a young stag. If you can glass it properly and go, oh no, it's only young from 6 Ks away and then stay on that sort of central ridge and keep glassing all the surrounding areas and put more resources and time and effort and whatnot, save the legs for finding a mature stag, hopefully a bit closer, but even if it is 6 kilometres away in a different direction, just making sure that it is a mature stag and something that he wants to target. And that's where I think for us, adding really reliable spotting scopes to our arsenal of, optics and glassing gear has been pretty amazing. As I said, I've been using it up north on the Chital deer on these guided hunts. And again, first thing in the morning, they've performed really well, looking over a couple of sort of big feeding areas and sort of springs that sort of run adjacent to the basalt wall, and just seeing the stags in particular be able to feed, because you can see them with the binoculars and go, oh, that's a stag, but then you can't really see the white tops early in the morning. And then as soon as you chuck that spotting scope on there, not only can you see the white tops, but you can see if the antlers and the tips and things are broken at like a kilometre away. And just having that luxury, again, on these paid guided hunts that I do for spotted safaris means that I'm not wasting time with clients sort of going in and trying to find, oh yeah, that stag looks like he's got a big frame, but then you travel a kilometre and get there an hour later and you find that he's got broken tops. By simply chucking the spotting scope on him from where you are at that sort of standing or sitting position, you can look up and go, oh yeah, he is a mature stag, but he's broken his tips, unfortunately, and we'll go look for another deer somewhere else. So again, that's been a great benefit. I haven't got a handheld rangefinder from the Leopold team, but James has been using the RX Full Draw 5 digital, handheld laser rangefinder. And again, with its sleek design and capabilities to range, over a couple of kilometres, it's absolutely ridiculous. And these are perfect for bow hunting. Anyone that bow hunts, I would really advise to get a handheld option for a rangefinder, just for those final moments of the stalk, especially on deer like Chital deer and things like that. Just being able to be sort of discreet, bring, one hand up, especially if you've got that rangefinder on your binocular pouch and tethered, and just being able to sort of do a much smaller movement than having to bring binos up and often use 2 hands and whatnot. I just think, a handheld rangefinder is absolutely perfect for bow hunting. So hopefully some of that information on our general optics and things and why we've made the switch will help you guys. For any other more detailed questions or comparisons or things like that, let us know. we're always happy to help out and try and touch base as to why we're, making the shift and trying new products. So our first listener question that has specifically been sent in was sent in by John Ryan. So John says, fellas, one for the FAQs I'd like to put up. Bedded shots. Last rut, I had a fallow buck that was bedded on a scrape at 30 metres that I cooked the shot on. I'd love to hear some insights on this. So this bedded shots, again, could probably be its own podcast topic, I guess. I'll just preface this whole next little bit of what I'm about to say by saying that bedded shots are bloody tricky. Probably the most difficult shots to take on any animal, regardless of species. And I think the main reason for that is that, and probably the main reason why we don't always advocate for others to take bedded shots, or why we don't regularly take them on bedded animals ourselves, would be that when bedded animals are like essentially bedded, they're protected by greater amounts of bone than when they're standing. And it probably comes down to being as simple as that. And if you can imagine that bone as being their armor on top of, their thick capes and all these types of things, there's also subsequently decreased shot angles when an animal's bedded, because often, the vegetation, the dirt, again, their bone, all these things contribute to decreased shot angles. So looking back on all of the bedded shots that I've personally taken, I would say 90% are probably on feral pigs, and maybe 10% on deer, if it's even that high. And I think if I had to analyse this and why that is, I would probably suggest that it's because mostly like where these animals bed. So deer tend to bed, I guess, in grassed areas or amongst a bit of vegetation, whereas I find that pigs, when they're bedded or wallowing, it's more open a lot of the time. Like unless they're in a real thick berry bush, a lot of the time you can, if they're bedded on water or bedded, just under an open tree, getting a bit of a breeze, I think it allows you to get a little bit closer. Especially pigs seem to switch off a lot more, and as long as you get the wind right, it's pretty right. Whereas deer, even if they're bedded, they're still often got their eyes half open, they're still chewing their cud, they just seem to be a bit more alert, which makes them harder to sort of reliably get in on whilst they're bedded. I also think that it's potentially the way these animals bed down that seems to be the reason why I take less sort of shots or bedded shots on deer. Deer seem to very rarely, I guess, lay fully belly up and sort of on their backs or anything like that, or on their completely on a side. They'll often lay on their brisket with, one shoulder slightly leaning onto the side of the hill that they're on or whatnot. So I think they sort of protect themselves more by like laying or tucking a leg under one side and leaning on that a little bit. Whereas, as I was sort of alluding to there, feral pigs can sometimes lay down, sort of belly up on their side, exposing the vitals in between their legs and that sensitive spot. I've seen this plenty of times with big boars wallowing and sometimes even looking like someone's, laid them out or they've been dead or shot or whatever. And then you go up there and you see their ear flick at like 5 meters. And you're like, holy crap, I thought it was dead. And that's just something that I've seen quite often with big boars, especially in low pressure situations on private properties where, it's stinking hot and they've just bedded on the edge of a big lagoon or something like that. So I think another factor that you got to consider with bedded shots is, especially on boars, obviously, is that these animals are half covered in mud. So in theory, if you're shooting above like that water line or that mud line, you're already halfway up the animal, which means if you shoot a couple of inches above that to try and clear that mud, you're really in the top 3/4 of the animal's chest or top 2/3 of the animal's chest, which means straight away, even if that animal doesn't rise out of its bed, you're hitting, halfway to 2/3, 3/4 of the way up the animal, and hitting high lungs, which can, again, that's if you get the shot absolutely perfect. So that's just something to also think about. When I do think about bedded shots, the way I see it is that the animals, I guess, tuck their front legs in and their elbows essentially flex. If you can imagine like putting your arms directly out in front of you now and just bringing your, I guess, fist from as far away as it can be towards you, the elbow tucks down towards your ribs. And that basically means that when that elbow flexes, it comes right in along your rib cage. And then if you're bedded down and someone's trying to hit you from the side, you've got your shoulder to contend with you've got the elbow to contend with, then you've got a rib, then you've got the opposing side rib, then you've got the opposing side elbow and shoulder to all compete with when you're trying to get penetration of the weapon of your choice. And again, all of that bone is just stacked on top of, if it's a wallowing boar, a bit of mud, if it's water on the offside or a bank or even hide of the animal. It's just a lot for an arrow or, a projectile to sort of compete with. So again, that's just something to consider with these bedded shots. What I do like to do to potentially combat that, I guess, is take quartering away bedded shots. But that's when you really have to know what you're doing in the anatomy of these animals. And I like to keep it pretty close. So in your example, John, I think you said you shot at 30 meters. I'd consider that a far shot, even if the animal was standing up perfectly, just feeding relaxed. I know that when they're bedded, they're relaxed. And if you're a really good archer or shot, it's quite a chip shot. But I just think when it comes to competing with the vegetation, bone, decreased shot angles, all that type of stuff, 30 meters is probably, for my capabilities, a bit far out of my range, as well as if on a quartering away shot, which I like to take on bedded animals, if you're 1 inch to the left or right of where you're intending to hit, your entry and exit points change so vastly on these quartering away shots. And the reason I do like to take quartering away shots is because you can come in behind the shoulder and front leg on one side and then punch through it on the offside. And it's just, again, almost half the bone that you're avoiding, which is great compared to a broadside shot or a quartering on. The one thing, as I was saying, is if you go an inch back, you can be hitting guts and not even hitting any vitals because they're tucked right up in the front there under the front legs and shoulder and things. So that's just another thing to consider. I guess the further back you come, you can almost have, especially with broadheads and arrows rather than rifle shots, is that broadheads can sometimes hit that hide, and rather than go in and sort of keep going with that line that you're trying to achieve and hit the offside shoulder, it can sort of race up along the outside or the hide of the animal, potentially even get in under one rib, but not penetrate through the rib cage and hit the offside, and sort of stay under the rib cage, but not really like enter the chest cavity or hit any vitals. And again, just lead to a bit of heartbreak, an animal being wounded, running off with an arrow in it in most instances. So again, bedded shots are extremely tricky. One thing that I would say that's good about bedded shots, particularly on deer, is that very rarely can they jump the string. I have had them do it, as you'll hear a bit later on in this podcast. But bedded deer can't sort of jump the string and get any lower, if you can imagine. So if there's a bedded chital deer, something that's notorious for jumping the string, at 20 meters, they can't really drop down. They can rise. So that's where I sometimes won't aim for the heart on those species of deer, say a fallow deer or a chital deer, and I'll aim for what I think the lungs are, because that way if they do rise and react to the shot, the heart comes back into play. Whereas in most instances when people are shooting at standing deer, they aim for the heart, and if they drop, the lungs come into play. So it's nearly the inverse on these bedded deer situations. So thank you very much for your question, John. I hope some of that makes a little bit more sense. And again, shot angles and bedded animals is probably going to be a future podcast topic in its own right. I've only very much touched on the tip of the iceberg in that, and I'm pretty keen to tackle this in even more detail eventually. So thanks. With unmatched quality, performance and reputation, Aimright International is a family and community-focused business. They're our go-to for spear guns, wetsuits and fins. Whether it be a simple shore dive, island hopping, days on the reef or bigger dives in the vast blue, Aimright has you covered underwater. The next question comes in from Eric Mudgetrack. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, Eric. I apologise if I've stuffed it up. And Eric said, "Hey guys, loving the content. It has helped me a heap. I had a question in mind. Maybe you could cover it in the podcast. How do you guys wash your hunting clothes and keep your scent to a minimum?" So this question I've included just because it's obviously someone sent in and put the effort in. But to be honest, James and I are pretty minimal when it comes to washing our gear. We are pretty simple in most things in scent control, really. we most of the time just try and play the prevailing wind direction, and then know the thermals inside and out, and just that tends to keep us in good stead. We do try and wash all of our hunting gear separate to other clothes. And I know that James, for example, pretty much won't use any detergents or anything like that not because of scent, more so because of the bright UV colours and things like that it's said to enhance. And we don't want our hunting clothes to sort of, I guess, be more reflective or more light in certain scenarios. That's just, something that, as far as I know, is more anecdotal than scientific. But again, we could, if someone writes in with a correction or anything like that, I'd be happy to obviously admit that I'm wrong there and learn from it as well. But like, in saying that, I do know mates who wash their clothes in scent removing shampoos and things like that. We've never really had an issue, to be fair, with thinking that we get winded more often than not or anything like that. As I said earlier, we play the thermals and wind most of the time, and honestly, there are just like some days that you probably shouldn't have gone hunting that morning because the wind just has it out for you. And I don't think if you wash your clothes, like maybe for the whitetail guys over in the US where they're stuck in one spot and, washing their gear in a scent remover, they get dressed in the field, don't really touch anything, don't really perspire, don't really do anything, certainly don't smoke, eat, do anything like that. It might help 1%, and if that 1% helps contribute to shooting a mature whitetail, then good on them. That's amazing. And again, I'm a massive percenters guy, so 1%, if you do it 100 times, adds up to achieving your goal and getting to 100%. So again, I don't want to, be conflicting or hypocritical, because I think if you believe in it, then do what you will. The biggest extent that we've ever gone to was we used to sometimes wash some of our gear in like tea tree oils or eucalyptus oils and things like that, like just drop like a little bottle cap into it in the washing machine, and it kind of gave a bit of a natural smell to it. We did also for a while there like cryovac clothes in vacuum sealed bags when we were hunting for sambar deer on small parcels of land. And whether it helped or didn't help, I honestly couldn't tell you. We don't have enough sort of evidence or research or outcomes to sort of go by in that instance. But again, it's just a thought. It's something that if you're transporting your gear or your hunting clothes in a box or storing it, in a vacuum sealed bag in the garage, and you're worried about, say you store pet food next to it, or it's on the shelf next to the oil or for your car or whatever, it might be a good idea to just store it in a vacuum sealed bag with a tiny bit of tea tree oil. And then when you get out in the bush, it's pretty much pristine. When you open it up, it's obviously going to be touching your skin. If you're sweating, smoking, doing whatever else, sitting in your car, it's going to get exposed to these odors and scents and things. So it's no way of keeping it, scent free, I guess. But minimizing scent is always something that we're conscious of. So hopefully that also, helps. Just a few thoughts from our end. And again, we're by no means experts on any of that type of stuff. We're pretty minimalistic when it comes to scent control of gear and bags and whatnot. The next question that we get, once again, is another one that we get a ton. So we're going to answer it here today. It's frequently asked across our socials. So we thought we'd revisit it. For those that are new to the podcast, we may have even answered it on a frequently asked question previously. And that is, if you had to recommend one camera setup as an all-rounder for hunting and the outdoors, what would it be? So without a doubt, for James and I, we would recommend to anyone, even, professionals, guys that are producing content on YouTube, getting paid for it, doing whatever they want to do, a Sony RX10 Mark IV definitely has its place in the arsenal of camera gear. One, just because they're extremely easy to use. The build itself is pretty lightweight and ergonomic. They've got a monitor screen that's movable. You can tilt it, out to the side, flip it around, tilt it down, all that type of stuff. So it's great for self-filming if you're into that. And then also if you're filming others or just filming game or whatever, there's touchscreen capabilities that allow for like tracking focus. So you can even have a deer walking in from the rider screen, tap on it, and it can register like an autofocus, which is pretty cool. It also has a digital viewfinder. So if the sun's glaring on your back and all this type of stuff, it's pretty standard in most Sony higher end cameras, I guess, that digital viewfinder, but it just helps you capture, I guess, focus, seeing your highlights, seeing your histogram, all these different things so much better. And I really love using a digital viewfinder just because, it can be low light, but then you look through that viewfinder and it's almost like, seeing something on a big TV. So it does make, using the camera a lot easier. Another added benefit which makes it super user-friendly is that it has both auto and manual focus capabilities. So again, if you're in a really rushed situation, particularly if it's in the open and you don't want to be using your hands a lot, auto focus is going to be great there. If you're in a really tight gully, got more time, and you're trying to pick out the stag's antler amongst a massive stand of trees, then the manual focus might be, better used. So just having those two options is going to be really handy and really good for those, I guess, budding filmmakers or photographers. As far as it comes to image quality, the Sony RX10 has, I think it's like a 20 megapixel image quality, which is great. Like you could easily blow those prints up, put them on a website, do whatever you need to do. It also has 4K video recording at, I think it's like 50 frames per second, which is pretty much more than what most people are doing. It's going to be great for YouTube. As far as zoom goes and the actual range of the lens itself, it's a 24mm to 600mm, lens, all in one. And this is massive because it reduces having to buy multiple lenses that can cost, thousands of dollars on a digital SLR camera these days. So some of our, for example, Sony or Sigma or Tamron lenses that we use might be worth $3,000 or $4,000, whereas this camera as an all-in-one is, I think, retails brand new years and years ago. It's like $2,000 something, whereas now you could probably pick it up pretty cheap, in the thousands, I'd say, if not $1,000. So especially if you're buying it secondhand, and a lot of people obviously look after their camera gear really well. So as I was trying to allude to, this lens is an all-in-one lens, so it's perfect for things like trophy shots, time lapses, wide sort of landscape shots, all the way through to being a 600mm zoom or telephoto lens that we use for, real intimate wildlife scenes where you've got a red stag feeding it 50, 60, 70 meters away, and you're getting a really tight crop on that animal and watching it feed on those nice, vibrant green shoots of grass and whatnot. So again, another thing that I will mention, we didn't use it a heap just because we like to try and record in 4K, but there are 100 frames per second options of, I guess, full length movie recording in 1080 HD, which is more than enough for YouTube as well. And 100 frames per second, if you then slow that down in post-processing, it's pretty much going to be very, very slow-mo. The camera does also have this, I guess, priority filming mode, which it's hard to wrap your head around, but you can shoot for, I think it's like 4 seconds, 1,000 frames per second, which is, imagine 1,000 images being taken in 1 second and then stacked on top of itself as a video or like a time lapse essentially. So that would be hectic for like checking arrow flight and just how your arrow flies out of its bow, how it hits the target, if it, all these type of things. If you're good enough, you can time it so that you capture a kill shot or something like that on an animal and get a real cool arrow arc flight hitting the animal, tufts of hair flying off at 1,000 seconds, and then the arrow zipping through that animal. One thing I would consider or say there is that, again, even at 500 or 250 frames per second, you can only film up for a maximum of like 8 seconds at this priority filming method. So again, it's perfect for arrow flight, but very rarely used by us just in our hunting settings, I guess, because you've got to do a lot right to be like, yep, James is going to shoot now. I'm going to hit the button. And in the next 8 seconds, he has to launch the camera without anything moving, basically. So the other thing I will say, before we had our spotting scopes, I remember in New Zealand many, many years ago, and that's where this camera really does come into its own as like an all-in-one. If you're trying to cut weight for backpack trips and you go, shit, I've got my digital SLR that's worth a couple of grand, pretty good, pretty waterproof, pretty lightweight, but then I've got to add in batteries, and then I've got to add in that big telephoto, say 200 to 600 millimeter lens. Then I've got to add in a 24 to 70 millimeter lens and maybe like a 200 or 70 to 200 millimeter lens for more of the over-the-shoulder stuff. There's 3 lenses, a camera body, tens of batteries. You're starting to get up there in tens of kilos of weight as well, and thousands of dollars worth of equipment. You could literally replace all of that with, this camera, which is a couple of $1,000s, going to be a lot lighter. And if you're out there for 10 days, you can save that weight and put a lot more batteries in your pack as well. So that's something that we use in New Zealand quite a lot. And as I was sort of saying and beginning to comment on is we didn't have a spotting scope in the early days. And what we did was use this camera and its zoom magnifier setting, which is basically when you're in manual focus on video mode, you can hit this button and it basically punches in on your sort of view on that viewfinder. And then by micro dialing the actual focus ring, you can then sort of look at, it zooms in like 100 times or something like that. And you can basically assess from like a kilometre away how good a bull tar is. So that was really, really valuable for us because we could only see it very minimalistically. You could see it as a big bull from your binoculars and stuff, but you couldn't sort of necessarily see how many inches it was or thereabouts. Whereas with that zoom magnifier capabilities, it's just something that helped and again, made it so much more than just a camera. We used it in so many different ways. And yeah, we used it for a long, long time. A lot of our earlier films are done with an RX10. And sometimes I often think, simpler is better because you just use it more. It's like a lot less gear. It's one camera to have there and you kind of not putting away lenses, putting lenses back on, and you're just filming with the one thing you have. So again, to wrap this segment up, I'll just say that the Sony RX10 Mark IV, if anyone can get them hands on it as a new budding, sort of even experienced filmmaker, photographer, whatever it may be, you're going to be very impressed. It's a great camera and something that I'd recommend for anyone trying to get into filming their own hunts and keen on sort of, upskilling.
There's a reason they say, get serious, get Hoyt. Ayden and I have always shot Hoyts, and that's because we're rough on gear. Our bows are constantly getting knocked and thrown around, but we know they will stand up to the test when the time comes. Hoyt has created the lightest, best performing carbon bows on the market. While some people change their bows like the season, I've had my old girl since 2019 and she's still performing flawlessly. If you're in the market for a new bow, get serious, get Hoyt.
The next series of questions were sent in by Mitch Martins. He says, "Hey guys, I've been loving all of your content, including the podcast. I've got some questions I'd love your answers on. Can you camp too close to the zone you're going to hunt?" And very shortly and simply, I would say absolutely. You can definitely camp too close to the zone you intend to hunt. For this reason, we would rather camp 10 kilometers away and have to drive closer and then hike in, a number of kilometers to get to, whether it's a central ridge or where we want to start the hunt from in most instances, or we would like to, camp as close as we can get, but still know that we're going to be hiking a couple of miles into a certain spot if it means that we can take in like a base camp. So for example, what we did in the US, we identified where certain ridges were and gullies were where the elk were living. And then we went, okay, where are we comfortable with putting all of our gear, equipment, which is obviously going to bring with it a lot of scent, noise, visual cues, like all these things that may disrupt natural elk behaviors. We did that in an area where we were like, yep, we're happy that there's not as much sign, not as much game here. And then from there, we hiked every morning a couple of miles up to a central ridge and then would essentially start our hunt. So, we like to obviously factor in our scent as being the biggest thing that is going to deter animals or simply educate them that we're in the nearby vicinity, which means that a lot of our camping is done, a long way away from where we intend to hunt. And we also like to look at things like hotspots, including water sources or benches with feed, just travel routes, whether there's crops nearby that animals are visiting, and just try and avoid these in general, especially if you're hunting, say, in Northern Territory and you've just driven 20 kilometers to get out the back to a dam that's on the place, and the next morning you're intending to hunt it with, your bow for water buffalo and pigs. There's no point camping right on that water just because there's water there. Like, you're better off bringing in your own water so you can shower, wash up, cook, whatever you may need to do, and camping 3 or 4 kilometers away from it. So those animals that are living on there, frequenting, hopefully drinking overnight and then slowly feeding away or coming back to it for the midday, are just not fazed by your presence at all, or not sort of educated that you're in the area. So hopefully that makes sense. In saying that, I've also had, in the NT for the same, explanation, I've had buffalo walk through, my very minimalistic bush camp where it's simply, me, a tent, a jet boil and my backpack. I've had buffalo bulls walk past in the middle of the night, simply go a couple hundred meters forward. I've found their shit and their tracks the next morning and followed them up, and they haven't been disturbed at all. So it really can depend with deer, and especially if you're hunting there for a couple of days in a row, potentially if it's something like the rut, and you're like, oh, I want to camp close to here because there's a scrape, I'd just probably advise you to push it back a little bit, and try and get somewhere that's probably, less animals, that you're not really scaring or changing any behavior. And even if you do have to wake up an extra half an hour or an hour earlier to hike into the area, I think that's going to be advantageous for you as that hunt goes on. The next question sent in by Mitch again is, how far can your scent travel? So sort of a follow-up from that previous question. And again, I've had numerous occasions, I can't tell you how many, where my scent has blown from one ridge over a gully that I'm sort of glassing into, and then hit the opposite face of a ridge where I was observing an animal, whether it be a sambar deer or a big mature boar in the mountains. And what I just described has easily occurred over distances of like up to 500 meters away, if not more. Seeing, a mature boar come out early in the morning, feeding on that ridge, and then very simply get a bit nervous. You see him put his head up, start sniffing, and then just charge back and leave that open ridge, heading for thick cover. And the only reason to explain it was that he winded us, and sure enough, you check the wind puffer and your scent's, drifted over that basin and straight over towards him. So I know it seems unrealistic, but I've just seen it happen too many times. I've also had it with sambar deer in Victoria where, you're glassing one particular ridge and a sambar deer miles away, literally barks and honks and sort of, is out of the vicinity. It happens quite often and more than you'd like to think. So even with where it really comes into play and where I've really seen it, because I think visually you don't have as much timber, and I think hunting chital deer in the open country, you can see it as well, that they really do smell you from literally hundreds of meters away. And again, you'll have a completely relaxed mob of chital deer. You'll start stalking in on them or be just simply observing them walk from, their feeding to bedding areas, and only for them to go from completely unaware to literally scattered, running in all directions, and you check the wind and it's blowing in their direction. So definitely something to be conscious of. And again, just trying to hunt always with the wind in your face, and then being aware of thermals, because thermals are one of those things that you can have your wind in your face, but then the thermals switch and suck uphill or downhill or something like that, and just really quickly end a stalk when you thought the wind was perfectly fine seconds prior. Mitch's last question that he sent in are there any other YouTube channels that you recommend? And there certainly is. We don't tend to watch too much YouTube and things, just purely because James and I are a little bit time poor. But we do, when we get the opportunity to watch YouTube, we do tend to like, I guess, the more cinematic film styles rather than sort of the GoPro hunt recounts where people are just sort of whacking and stacking and shooting a lot of animals and focusing more on the kill. We do tend to like the ones that are a bit more rich in the sense of having a storyline, potentially focusing on some emotions, the hardship, the challenges. And not every hunt is going to be hard or difficult, but just being able to portray, the emotions we're feeling. I think it draws me into those films, as well as seeing a little bit of wildlife, some of the scenery in the area, and focusing more on the whole hunt itself rather than just one tiny aspect of it, which is the kill. So in saying that, I would say that we really like, here in Australia, I think Bow Hunt Down Under, Jerry Redmond and Brad Smith are two guys that we really look up to, especially in the early days. We used to do a few hunts with them, see what went into their filming processes, help them on hunts and help produce, some of their content. And they're two guys that, again, have really inspired James and I, and we don't find our work too dissimilar to theirs for a lot of the reasons that I said earlier in terms of trying to tell a story. Over in the States, we really like, Meat Eater, just as a network. I think they play a good role in, trying to advocate for hunters and utilizing meat and eating, the animals that they catch, whether it be from land or sea. Johnny Vincent, his whole series and I guess YouTube channel is really insightful. The way he tells the story is very well done. He's a good narrator of his hunts. And then the film crews that are obviously like quite vast and paid professionals do a really good job of capturing just the difficulty of where he goes into, and he does a good job of explaining sort of why he's out there, and that he's not necessarily seeking a hunt to kill an animal, but more the experience and the lessons and, fulfillment that he gets from doing that. Matthews, the guys that make the bows, have a series called Proving Ground, which goes into a number of their staff shooters, pro shooters, experts, or really good hunters that get the bows each year and go and do a few cool hunts. And the way that they do it is just really fun. They're telling a story, but it's not your typical slow cinematic. It's cinematic, but in terms of how it's shot is very, very well done and executed. But they're almost more upbeat, a little bit more fun, a little bit quirky. They do a really good job of showcasing the guys that are hunting and their personality and the sides of them that make them unique, and again, really lovable sort of people, really cool to watch. I've really liked those personally. They're very, very well made films. And lastly, I'd say Remy Warren, again, who's just an amazing hunter, which again makes him really likable. Some of the content that he's put out, whether it's self-filming or getting people to film him on his hunts, has been really, really cool. And yeah, I would say they're probably the main YouTube channels that we recommend. Again, there are probably a lot out there that I'm not mentioning, purely because, again, we haven't sort of watched a heap of YouTube. It's the same as we're on social media, but we sort of reply to FAQs, post a few photos and whatnot, and then sort of off there trying to get out and hunt and do all these things as much as possible. So if anyone has any recommendations that they think are really great in terms of YouTube channels, particularly here in Australia, please send them in to us. I would love to hear them. And then I'd also love to give some other Aussie brands a plug. We obviously have the Twin Elements YouTube account that we're very proud of, and hopefully can fit alongside some of those people that we just, sort of previously mentioned there. And yeah, hopefully you guys are enjoying everything that we're putting out. We love making our videos and sort of, showcasing our passion for hunting. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters with the mission to give Australian hunters the resource they deserve. Through community events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. It's a community. Check out their incredible mega store in Brisbane today, or head to their website to shop all things hunting and outdoors. Sam Nealon sent in, "G'day boys, question. The video titled History with the Chital deer, where the first stag jumps the string. How far away were you from him for that shot, and what poundage would you have been running with your bow? Their reflexes are amazing. I was telling one of the boys about the video and he flat out doesn't believe me. Such an amazing job and good footage." Well, firstly, thank you very much, Sam. We appreciate that feedback. History was actually one of our very first films, when we started, as I said earlier, going down that sort of more cinematic pathway, trying to tell the story. And for those that haven't watched it, make sure you do head over to the YouTube channel. As Sam said, there's a pretty cool hunt for a nice Chital stag, and you can see in the footage how he ducks and turns, and we were just lucky that we sort of aimed for his heart, and were able to still take out the back of the vitals there and took out the lungs. And he didn't go far after the shot, but if we had been aiming any higher or back for the lungs or sort of center mass of the animal, it would have either ended in, a bad shot, like a gut shot or something like that, or simply missing him as he ducked the string and turned. So that particular clip, from memory, was around 30 meters in distance, maybe even a touch less. I think James might have even been a touch less than 30 meters, tucked into the last little bit of cover in this little bush. And he sort of drew as the stag got up from his bed, completely relaxed, turned sort of slightly quartering away broadside, and James squeezed off the shot. And that shot was taken using a 70-pound bow. And as I said, that Chital stag sort of ducked the string and reacted to the shot, which you can see very clearly in the footage and the slow-mo, which is pretty cool, again, having the luxury of footage. And we've had Chital deer duck the string in so many different scenarios over the years. Plenty of times it's been at 20 meters or closer. So for us, a 30-meter shot is probably the further end of where we like to shoot. But even at 20 meters and less, they do still have the capacity to duck and jump the string, which is something that you'll be able to tell your mate about because, yeah, it happens quite commonly. We've even had, as I sort of mentioned earlier, when I think might have been John asked the question on bedded deer, we've had bedded chital deer get up and react, I guess, quite quickly to the shot, jumping upwards out of the way of an arrow. And often we shoot, as I said earlier in that question of the podcast, we aim when they're bedded for the lungs, taking into account that they may rise slightly because very rarely can they obviously sink through the hard earth and go down and react lower to the shot, but like a jack in the box, they can spring up. So yeah, not only can they drop down on the shot and twist if they're sort of standing, but they can bounce up from a bedded position, which is absolutely insane. They really are the masters of getting out of the way of an arrow. And again, that all comes back to just being hunted in India by tigers and trying to evade predators, I guess, and having super, super quick reflexes. So we wouldn't probably believe it ourselves if it wasn't for having the ability to watch back a lot of this footage and the benefits of, super slow-mos and being able to track the arrow on its way to hitting the vitals and then have the deer sort of not be there essentially when the arrow actually finally makes it at, as we said earlier, close distances such as 20 meters. So thanks again for the question, Sam, and we're glad that you enjoyed history, that old video. The next question has been sent in by Ayden Clark. He says, "Hey legends, I had a question about eating wild pigs. I've always wanted to eat them, but every time I shoot one, they're often crawling in ticks. If they have ticks on them, do you bother eating them?" So this is a great question and something that if you heard our podcast topics, I think it was 14 and 15, you have to go back and listen in the library, but we did sort of diseases in wild pigs and wild game, as well as, tips to preventing and managing, diseases from wild meats in humans. So you have to go back and listen there. But basically, whenever you see or shoot an animal, especially if it's a wild pig, there always needs to be very conscious thought towards considering whether you're going to eat it or not, inspecting the animal for any signs of disease, parasite infestation, etc. Having said that, in this instance, when it comes to eating wild pigs here in Australia with ticks on them, I believe that it's fine. The way I like to look at it is that the risk to us, as in the humans, in regards to ticks, is that ticks are ectoparasites, meaning that they're outside or I guess exterior of the body, of the cavity, of the meat, all that type of stuff. So their ticks or parasites are located on the outside of the animal. So fleas, ticks, lice, mites all belong to this group that we like to call ectoparasites, and they all commonly infect wild pigs. So one of the main reasons, interestingly enough, why feral pigs wallow is to disrupt the attachment, I guess, of these ectoparasites and try and remove them from their skin. It's the same as water buffalo as well. A lot of the animals that wallow, you'll see they then go and rub that wallowing in the mud on trees, trying to, one, spread their scent and, mark territory and stuff, but also disrupt and dislodge ticks and, these ectoparasites. So that's just something to be mindful of. When it comes to human safety and meat quality, once you remove the skin and hair from these feral pigs, which have the ticks on it, there's very little risk. So whilst it might be a little bit unsettling or a little bit gross, seeing all the ticks on them, I consider it very much just a, negligible sort of threat to us. Where there may be concern, I will say, is that if an animal has an underlying sort of systemic disease, so something that's causing that animal to have unusual amounts of weakness, maybe loss of condition, be quite skinny, poor, all that type of stuff, there may be a reason to assume that it might be more at risk compared to, the 100 other pigs in the population of getting more ectoparasites on it, such as ticks. So if you can imagine that the pig that I just explained, for example, has some sort of disease, say it's brucellosis, or say it's some really heavy worm parasite infection or something internally that you can't necessarily see when you shoot it, and then you get up to it and it's extremely skinny because it's got so many ticks on it and stuff like that. The ticks might not be causing the actual, I guess, malnourishment and, skinniness. as such, but the ticks may be making the most of that animal with a prior illness. For example, that animal with, brucellosis or the parasites, the heavy worm burden, for example, might be weaker, slower, all these sorts of things, which means that when it stumbles through the bush, it's got more time for ticks and other ectoparasites to attach to its skin. What I would say is that, when you do shoot a pig, always inspect it for anything like that. If it does have a heap of ticks on it, if it is really skinny and you think the meat quality is not going to be good, then I wouldn't advise to eat it. If in retrospect you shoot a really young, nice, fat, healthy looking pig, really shiny, was acting completely normal prior to the shot, you get up to it and it has some ticks on it, I'd be happy to butcher that. Obviously be careful of not, doing any meat contamination and all that type of stuff. Undergo the butchering process extremely, cleanly and have really good hygiene. But there should be no reason why you can't then, consume that meat once you've gone through the correct processing routes. And again, just remember, in regards to feral pigs, remember that freezing the meat for 2 weeks in most freezers, just generic freezers, will kill 99% of bacteria and diseases that we're worried about, whilst cooking wild pork to 71 degrees is simply the best way to kill all of the diseases that we're worried about here in Australia, so including like brucellosis and stuff. So by doing those two things, freezing and then cooking adequately, as well as just general meat care, inspection, all that type of stuff, you're really, really, really minimizing your risk of any diseases. So great question, Ayden. Really appreciate your contribution there, and hopefully that will help out a lot of other people who have probably no doubt thought the same thing. I know that there are sometimes I look at animals and go, geez, why has it got so many ticks on it and they're crawling everywhere, and it can even make, getting a photo with it sometimes a bit uncomfortable, seeing how many mites, lice, fleas or ticks might be on a big boar, but it's all part of it. Again, these wild animals don't get any, human intervention that domestic animals get. So it's not that domestic animals don't get fleas and ticks. Working as a vet in the Northern Territory for the last couple of years, the amount of cattle that get ticks on them and stuff, and then get subsequently treated with backlines or ear tags or whatever, and insecticides that, help to prevent them from getting these ticks attaching, because they don't like the treatments. But then, it's what to say is better. Is the treatment better? Is, eating something with the odd flea and tick on it that's got no treatment on it? So again, don't want to open up a can of worms there, but each to their own. But yeah, great question. Thank you very much. The next question has been sent in by Lonnie Brokeman. He says, hey gents, in regards to very low density sambar, if there's a really mature velvet stag hanging with an in-season hind/hinds, is he likely to want to rut/be defensive, or is he going to be happy to let the harder 2 to 3 year olds rut her? Or is she more likely to leave the area altogether and look for a mature hard antler stag? Apologies for the loaded question, guys, just trying to understand more about the herd that I'm hunting. This is a great question. Shows that Lonnie's obviously thinking long and hard about sort of, how he's going to approach this situation, really trying to work out the population that he's hunting. He's obviously looking at, male to female ratios, age of the animals, all these type of things, which is really cool. To answer his question, in this instance, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's nothing, preventing the velvet stag physically from being able to breed the hind. I'm assuming he has, both testes descended, no cryptorchidism, which is basically where one testes is either damaged or retained in the abdomen and things like that. So structurally, I think he would physically be able to stand behind the hind, raise onto her, insert his penis, breed her and stuff like that. However, what I would say is that in this instance, being in velvet, his testosterone levels would likely be 5 to 10 times lower than that of any hard antler stag in the area. And that's simply based off studies of deer testosterone levels in, velvet compared to hard antler stags of the same species, which is important, mind you. So hard antler stags with that 5 to 10 times increased testosterone of the velvet stag will have increased aggression, libido, rutting activity, scent marking, muscle mass, readiness to breed, you name it. It's basically the testosterone is essentially preparing them to mate and get ready, having that readiness to breed, which I think personally for me, I don't really know if there's a right or wrong answer to this. It's all about interpretation. I think that, again, in this instance, I think those factors that I just mentioned in the hard antler stags, even though they're 2 to 3 years old and potentially smaller body mass, smaller antler-wise, I think just their attitude would probably outweigh the bigger stag's maturity, given that he's in velvet and probably less inclined anyway for any confrontation. So whilst I think he's obviously, the more mature, I think that those 2 to 3 year olds are going to probably bluff him and try and breed her themselves. And there's no reason why, maturity wise, a 2 to 3 year old deer wouldn't be able to breed that young hind. So I think, the velvet deer is going to be less likely to want to fight and breed anyway, and more inclined to probably, revert away to going somewhere else that's more quiet. You often see these velvet deer will often be away from the hinds anyway. If it is a really small pocket of bush or something like that, or private property, in a more suburban area as well, rather than like the high country in Victoria, where the stags tend to try and get away, the stags might be forced to be on the same fringe country trying to put on condition, or same, garden, for example, or whatever, or like lawns and things. So I'm not really sure where you're based, obviously, so it's hard to answer this, but they're just things I'd think about. Like, they may be forced to be in the same sort of area as some of these young stags and hinds, but even within that, I think they're going to try and escape that and try and push out a little bit wider and basically just stick away from those young fellas. Like, I can give another terrible analogy, which we're really good at here on the Twin Elements podcast, but I just like to think of it as a bar setting, thinking of, that velvet stag as a, 45-year-old guy that maybe he goes to the pub every Friday night and, he's non-confrontational. So he's in velvet, essentially. He's non-confrontational. He might know the bartender by now, has a few mates that he waves hello to, but really he's just there to watch the footy, have a few peanuts at the bar and have a couple of drinks and go home. Same route every night. He's patternable. And again, the biggest thing just being non-confrontational. And again, he does it every Friday night. And then in walks on this particular Friday night, a couple of, rutted up young 18-year-olds who are out having their first bloody beer, and they're letting everyone know about it. They're being very silly, essentially harassing the girls a little bit, being loud, slapping each other on the ass, being dickheads, knocking chairs over, all that type of stuff. I would like to think, as the mature, adult in this situation, someone that's been there, done that plenty of times, that 45-year-old, more mature adult male, is just going to go home and sleek away quietly and go, yep, these young bucks are out, they're being dickheads, but next Friday I'll come back out and everything will be all good, all the same. And hopefully, rather than trying to match their aggression and their attention seeking and all this type of stuff, again, being non-confrontational, I think that larger male, in this instance of the Sambar deer, is going to be non-confrontational and try and head home out the back door, knowing that, all's going to be well next week, when he essentially, is coming back into his breeding cycle and getting that testosterone and all that type of stuff. So hopefully, again, terrible analogy, but hopefully that just helps you paint the picture. As far as the hind goes in this instance, she's going to find the male who is the most mature, who is the most impressive and most willing to breed her. So if that big velvet fella is showing no interest whatsoever, she's not going to really be enticed by that. She wants a male that's going to be, sniffing her, putting in the effort, all that type of stuff. So in this instance, it might be one of those of the bigger 2 to 3 year olds. So she'll, as with most animals, domestic animals included, she will have to stand to mate with him, which is a sign of becoming in estrus, is that they sort of stand and are ready to be mounted. And physically, if that young stag, only being 2 or 3, can stand and mount her and do the job, then he will. So there's no difference to her, whether it's the old, like, mature stag or the young 2 to 3 year old. Whoever's showing the most interest is going to breed her. If, worst case, she isn't bred by any of those 2 to 3 year olds because they're being too busy being dickheads and fighting and not actually breeding with her, and say she's not bred, then she will simply return to estrus like 21 days later, roughly, which is when their cycle repeats. And then she'll ovulate and release eggs and all that type of stuff again, be fertile and whatnot. That's when maybe that mature velvet stag has come out of velvet and stripping his antlers, and that's when maybe it's a different story and he's now the aggressor and throwing his weight around, maturity around, those 2 to 3 year olds sort of bugger off. So that's just my thoughts on it, Lonnie. Hopefully that paints a bit of a better picture for you. But yeah, definitely an interesting case, and best of luck on the Sambar situation there.
Need a caffeine hit? We've got you covered. Power your passions with OzCaff Energy. Designed to be convenient, discreet and portable. These small caffeine pouches pack a punch and will get you out of those lows in no time. Place one of the pouches under your top lip for rapid absorption, which will have you performing your best in no time. With added benefits of 0 calories and 0 sugar, there's nothing to lose. Use code TWINELEMENTS for 10% off your next order.
Alrighty guys, so the last question for today was sent in by Leighton Frisk. He says, how does a beginner go about picking hunting grounds, especially in state forest? He says, I'm hunting for meat for the family, so not phased on species or gender. Could you do a podcast on the type of terrain beginners should look for to target different species and what you use to find it, i.e. Google Earth, etc.? So another awesome question, and one that, to be honest, deserves a lot more thought and attention focused towards it than what I'm prepared to put in today, being the end of our FAQ section, which is why I'm pleased to announce that this topic sounds like it perfectly complements next week's podcast episode, which is going to be dedicated solely to tackling this question, basically. And James is going to go through that and essentially discuss scouting from scratch. So when it comes to looking at large private property access or public lands such as state forest. And what I will drop here just to answer Leighton very briefly, and I have sent him quite an elaborate message on the socials and things. A lot of the topics that we start to think about and look for when tackling sort of big public land or big private property that James is going to speak about in the podcast next week is basically the necessities. So we start looking at things like water sources, marking them in, downloading, offline maps and going, okay, there's a water hole, there's a trough, there's a creek, there's a dam, marking in all those points. We then start to go, okay, animals need water, they also need food. So where's the best fringe country or crops or pastures or whatever that are surrounding those areas that are often accompanied by, I guess, thicker bedding areas nearby, so the animals don't have to travel too far between food and water. And if you're hunting, I guess, public land, finding where the thick bedding areas are, but then it could potentially be private property that is next door that you can't even hunt on potentially, but the animals are going there morning and night being crepuscular, and then feeding back into that thicker, I guess, public land that you're able to hunt, and then hunting them in a bedded situation, very slow spot and stalk. So from there, we also like to look at, I guess, just generally roads and access points, being able to get close to these water sources to then go for a walk. That all comes to play with even just understanding the prevailing wind direction of this property or this area, because there's no point having a track that allows you to hunt, a westerly direction if the wind's terrible for that area. So knowing where the next track is to get you somewhat close and come in from a different direction would be advantageous. Other things that we'll discuss in this podcast would be just covering the miles, whether it's boots and putting feet on the ground, or if it's binoculars, getting up, on a central ridge and glassing and just strategies for that. We'll also cover basically just talking to property owners, because often people overlook just how valuable they are as a resource. James is really, really good at it, and I think it comes back from the veterinary, I guess, side of things, where we talk to property owners and, livestock owners as a living. They're essentially our clients in our veterinary setting. And being able to talk to them comfortably without being a burden on them is really, really important. So even just asking them simple questions like, where have you got the stock? Why have you not got stock in that paddock? How many stock have you got on the place? Understanding carrying capacity of like that, but then also what that leaves as a resource for the animals they're hunting. Being able to then extend that to, where do you see the deer? And that just comes with general chit chat and banter and stuff like that. And I won't touch on it too much, but again, James loves to talk. He's really, really good at it. And he's got a bit of an art to basically asking the property owners questions that then translate into him knowing more about the property without ever setting foot on the property. Like, he will talk to a property owner, look at, where food, water, all those points that I've discussed earlier are, and he'll go, if there are not deer on this paddock or this bench or whatever, I will eat my hat based on what the property owners have said. And you go there, walk it for the first time ever, and there's deer on it. And it's something that we're able to do quite repeatably, which I think hopefully by listening to next week's podcast, Leighton, you'll be able to see there's a bit of an art to it, but it's not overly complicated. And by doing the steps that we'll discuss, you really can maximize your outputs as far as success of hunting these big parcels of land. Other things, as you've alluded to, topography is massive. Knowing the different, behavior of the animal species. I can't tell you the amount of times I've found really good, areas for buffalo simply by looking on Google Earth on the properties that I'm allowed to hunt and looking for game trails or coming off the floodplains or coming between water sources to their bedding areas and just hunting that area as a bit of a hotspot. So, definitely topography, knowing their behavior. And then also, I think the last thing that would go without mentioning would be using, satellite imagery and e-scouting ahead of these hunts and then comparing where you've walked and know that deer are, and then looking, because there's no point hunting on 10,000 acres and doing the same walk every single time. You may be successful, 5 out of 10 times, which is great odds as far as I'm concerned. But if you can then go, oh, I'm successful here 50% of the time, but there's 20 more of these spots on the property, and some of those may be better, some of them will most likely be worse. But just going and looking at 20 different spots over different times of the year and different seasons and that type of stuff, you can just maximize, because a lot of people go, oh, I've checked out a property, but they've checked out one corner of it and they haven't done the other 3 quadrants, whatever. So just knowing and utilizing all the space on your property, again, e-scouting and using those satellite images really, really helps. So hopefully that's just a, bit of a trickle to the answer that you want, Leighton. And hopefully that just helps get everyone here thinking. But please stay tuned for next week's episode where we do scouting, basically for areas that we want to start hunting, whether it be public land or big private property. That's going to be a really, really great podcast topic. So that wraps up today's podcast. As I've said, we have some big things in store for you guys and girls as we get deeper into 2025. As of this moment, we have set up a discount code on the Twin Elements website for all of our prints. Simply use code the Twin Elements podcast for 10% off any print orders that you guys place on the website. With over 40 prints to choose from, there's literally something there for everyone. We've had some amazing people support us, buy tens of prints. We've started putting up on our socials a few people's photo walls and things that they've done for their houses or clients in their businesses. And again, these prints are perfectly suited for display at home or in the office. So we really appreciate you guys supporting us there. And we'll keep trying to add to that, catalogue or gallery of images as we go about more adventures. We are going to be heading down to the Venture Hunting and Outdoors Megastore in Brisbane in July, where we're going to be doing basically a big movie night similar to what we did for that Rut Ready event earlier this year. So we had about 150 people come earlier in the year. We're going to do a similar thing this year, do a movie night finished by a question and answer, and that's going to be themed around bow hunting, buffalo, bantang bulls and wild boars in the Northern Territory. For those that can't, attend, and we haven't got specific dates yet for that movie night in July, for those that can't attend, James and I are going to be releasing our YouTube series on that adventure from that same time. So from there'll be 6 different parts. I guess the benefit of coming is that you get to see it as one big movie, but don't stress. Basically, everything that you see as one big movie on the night by coming to Venture and meeting us in person will be broken down and released over 6 weeks as a 6-part series, which is going to be absolutely awesome. We recently did our Twin Elements YouTube giveaway for 20,000 subscribers, and we used the highlights video or the, trailer as a bit of a way to get people excited. So that's, if you haven't seen it, make sure you jump on the YouTube channel. Please make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all future Twin Element film releases over there. But essentially that's what you can be looking forward to for that adventure movie night, is the complete film and hunt breakdown from that Northern Territory adventure. Another venture hunting and outdoors related post or announcement incoming. We are going to be at Venture's Megastore in Brisbane in Springwood to celebrate their 1 year opening anniversary this 9th and 10th of August, which I believe lands on a Saturday, Sunday, which should be really easy for people to hopefully get time off well in advance now. We unfortunately missed on the grand opening last year in 2024, so we are super excited to get back there this 2025 period, see all of you legends that support us and hopefully want to come down to the event. We know that Venture and the team there is striving to make it even bigger and better than last year as they keep delivering and basically growing this hunting and outdoor community here in Australia. So we're really keen to see everyone there. Another great event to add to the calendar. And lastly, from James and I, we really, really appreciate everyone's support on this podcast. Please continue to subscribe, review, and rate the podcast. Again, we put a mountain of work into it. A lot of time spent replying to FAQs, a lot of time trying to basically help educate other people just from our lessons learned over years and years of doing it, as well as telling our successful hunts and stories, which everyone seems to really enjoy. So whether it's on our YouTube, social media, or this podcast, we really do appreciate the support across all of the different platforms. And again, James and I are really thankful for you guys all buying into everything that we're trying to do here at Twin Elements. So thank you very much, and we will catch you next week for another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Cheers, guys.